While the plebs were sitting in their parents' basements playing Elden Ring on their gaming PCs, I was here in my mansion playing a far more difficult and hardcore game. That's right. I was playing Super Monkey Ball Banana Rumble, which is a Nintendo Switch exclusive.
Shadow of the Erdtree came out recently, and literally everyone is praising it and saying it's a lot of fun. Well, almost everyone, because Harman Smith, the Nintendo fanboy, does not like the DLC. Now, there's nothing wrong with not liking the Elden Ring DLC, but the thing is, he goes off to attack the player base of Elden Ring, and he tries to say it's bad because he personally does not like it as much as Zelda. But I don't want to waste too much time on the intro, so sit back, grab some popcorn, and enjoy the show.
Even I couldn't have possibly predicted that Elden Ring, Shadow of the Erdtree, could have flopped as badly as it did.
Apparently Shadow of the Erdtree flopped even though it's getting amazing ratings online and everyone is doing nothing but praising it. In fact, in its first 3 days after release, it sold 5 million copies, and we are talking about a DLC, not even a game. So I'm gonna have to go ahead and ask for a source that the DLC flopped. Who am I kidding?
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
People are doing damage control right now. They're doing the typical fromsoftwares thing where they're trying to say that, like, actually, people just got filtered by the difficulty.
Just like the first boss of Armored Core 6, people were getting filtered by the difficulty. You could tell the difference between people who actually wanted to put the time in to learn the mechanics of the game and get better, and those who just expected an easy experience. It was the same thing with the base game. People were getting filtered by Margit.
Never mind, this is a DLC campaign that requires specific things to be done in the base game to get through, right?
So the thing in the game that you're required to do to get into the DLC is to defeat Mohg. Now Mohg is a pretty late game boss, and the reason why they locked the DLC behind this boss is because you're going to need, like, late game items to beat the DLC. Also, if you can't beat Mohg, you have no chance of beating the DLC.
Never mind that people know how to play the game, that it's been out forever, that it's old as dirt.
The game is old as dirt? My brother in Christ, the game is 2 years old. In order for a game to be considered old, like for me, it has to be like 15 years old. But according to some people on the internet, all it takes is 2 years for a game to be ancient.
This is...
Okay, you really need to cut these extremely long pauses out of your videos. Now, my editing's not the best either, like my content is not the most high effort content in the world, but I'm not leaving these long ass pauses in my videos. This guy genuinely could be a somewhat successful YouTuber if he put a little bit of time into editing his videos, because there are people out there who agree with him, unfortunately.
Supposed to be the biggest DLC campaign of the year. People were calling this Game of the Year worthy.
I genuinely think that it is Game of the Year worthy. Obviously it can't win Game of the Year because it's not a game, but there's more content in this DLC than most AAA games nowadays. FromSoftware is one of the only companies that will drop a DLC the size of a game.
Right? Ever since this thing was announced. Like, I remember when people were trying to tell you that Shadows of the Erdtree would outsell Tears of the Kingdom.
Jesus Christ, here we go again. Nobody was claiming that Shadow of the Erdtree was going to outsell Tears of the Kingdom because Tears of the Kingdom and the base game of Elden Ring sold a similar amount of copies. Tears of the Kingdom sold around 20 million copies, which is really impressive, and Elden Ring sold around 25 million copies, which is also very impressive.
Right, in 2023, and that would win Game of the Year over Baldur's Gate 3.
Nobody was claiming that Elden Ring would win Game of the Year 2023 because it already won in 2022. And a game that came out in 2022 can't win in 2023.
Like, it was like some of the most insane, elaborate cope I've ever seen in my life.
Says the guy who has made like 8 videos in the past 2 weeks coping about Elden Ring. Come on, man, it's time to get some self-awareness.
Like, it was absurd how hardcore fanboys were in pretending that this game was going to be an industry-defining masterpiece.
Okay, two things. First of all, you are in no position at all to call anybody else a fanboy. I mean, you fanboy for Nintendo so hard. You are literally defending Nintendo the other day by saying stop being poor and accept $70 ports of 14-year-old games. And second of all, you said that Elden Ring is not industry defining, and that is a complete lie because so many games are trying to copy its success and looking up to Elden Ring for inspiration. The Souls games were so influential on the video game industry that it spawned an entire genre of games called Souls-like games.
I think people are really underestimating just how poorly received this game actually is.
I don't know, man. When I go to Metacritic, I actually see the opposite. I see the game getting praised. What's your source that this game was negatively received? Oh wait.
My source is that I made it the fuck up.
Taking a look at Metacritic here, the game got a 96 score, which puts it among the best games of all time, but apparently it was poorly received because Harman says so.
Right. Right now, people are like doing damage control for it and like bending over backwards to justify like everything they've done here with like the rehashed content and the reused movesets and just some of the plot elements, right?
I know you're not gonna cry about reused content when you praise Tears of the Kingdom, which reuses tons of stuff from Breath of the Wild. You also praise Pokemon, which has been using the same moves for how many years now? What I'm getting at here is you have no problem calling out Elden Ring for reusing content, but when your precious Nintendo game reuses content, you're silent on it. You don't get to pick and choose which games are allowed to reuse content. Either reusing content is okay, or it's not okay, all across the board.
But I do think it's safe to say that like now that we have all of our questions answered, now that we've gotten the DLC, now that we have gotten all the content in Elden Ring, it's safe to say that Elden Ring did not match up to 2017's Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild.
And there Harman goes again, comparing a Nintendo game to a non-Nintendo game because it's all he knows how to do. I've played through both Breath of the Wild and Elden Ring, and they are nothing alike. Breath of the Wild is more of a puzzle game, where Dark Souls and Elden Ring is a combat-focused game.
Let alone the sequels, right? Elden Ring was a complete failure.
Elden Ring was FromSoftware's most successful product they ever created, but apparently it's a failure. It did a lot better than even they expected it to do. Also, if Elden Ring is a failure for selling 25 million copies, wouldn't that mean that Tears of the Kingdom is also a failure for selling around 20 million copies?
This really needs to be established going forward as to just what happened here, right? You know, this was a game that was propped up artificially by a corrupt game journos trying to sell you on the idea that PlayStation and Xbox have games that like Nintendo Switch does not have.
PlayStation and Xbox do have games the Switch don't have, and the reason for that is most likely the Switch is underpowered. And I know me saying that is going to cause people to seethe in my comments, but it's whatever, dude. Like, I don't think the Switch's games are terrible or anything, but let's not act like it's the most powerful system in the world. I guarantee if Nintendo's console was more powerful, half these games that don't make it to the Switch would be on the Switch.
They were trying to convince you that like FromSoft is some like top tier game developer when in reality they aren't anything noteworthy in any way, shape, or form.
They're nothing noteworthy? They're a small studio that put out a game that is better than most games that have thousands and thousands and thousands of developers. FromSoftware is a very talented studio, and that's why their game Sekiro won Game of the Year in 2019, and Elden Ring won Game of the Year 3 years later.
Right. Like, they were trying to tell you that, like, Elden Ring was Game of the Year 2022, Armored Core 6 was Game of the Year 2023, and Shadows of the Erdtree would be Game of the Year 2024.
I thought Armored Core 6 was really fun, but I didn't think it was Game of the Year worthy, especially with games like Baldur's Gate 3 coming out that same year. But nobody's claiming that the DLC will win Game of the Year because, I mean, it's in the title, Game of the Year. It's Game of the Year, not DLC of the Year.
It was insane. right? It was completely out of touch with the reality. Let's just ignore all the better developers out there. Let's just ignore all the better games on Nintendo platforms.
Why the fuck does everything have to be Nintendo with this guy? Like, he can't just say ignoring all the better games. He has to say ignoring all the better games on Nintendo platforms. Like, dude, face reality. You're a grown-ass man doing this shit.
Let's just ignore the fact that Elden Ring specifically ignored the Nintendo Switch, right? They did not release on Nintendo Switch because they knew, right, that if players were able to compare Elden Ring and Zelda side by side, it would be exceedingly obvious that Elden Ring is inferior to Zelda in every way, shape, and form.
This has to be the biggest cope I've ever seen in my life. There's a reason Elden Ring did not make it to the Nintendo Switch. And the reason why is the fact that it just simply wouldn't be able to run on the Switch's underpowered hardware. The Switch usually does fine for Nintendo's games because they're not all that graphically demanding, they focus more on fun, which is a good thing. But there's no way they'd be able to get Elden Ring running on the Switch, because I played Elden Ring on the Steam Deck, which is much more powerful than the Switch, and it ran around 30 to 35 frames per second. Meaning if the game was on Switch, imagine how bad they'd have to make the game look and how low the frame rate would be. It would be like a PowerPoint, like a slideshow. I don't know why you have such a hard time admitting the fact that the Switch is not a powerful console. This is why so many people in the Nintendo community have been asking for a Switch Pro recently.
Like, just like The Witcher and Dragon Age before it, these games, the illusion that these games are better than Zelda is nothing more than like a smokescreen cast by game journals. Like, oh, look at the mature storylines. Oh, look at the dark visuals. Oh, they're so much cooler than Zelda. But
okay, obviously Elden Ring has better graphics, but I mean, whether you think Zelda's art style is cooler or Elden Ring's art style is cooler is completely subjective. Zelda goes for a lighter art style, where Elden Ring goes for a darker fantasy art style, and I think both pull off what they're going for pretty well.
so what can we learn from this when it comes to Shadows of the Erdtree?
You know it's bad when in the video where you're criticizing the DLC, you can't even say the name of the DLC right. It's not Shadows of the Erdtree, it's Shadow of the Erdtree. You think you would know this with how much you've been obsessing over it recently, but I guess not.
Like, what can we take away from this? Like, first of all, we really need to establish like the pattern whenever like someone starts like talking about how a Souls game is disappointing, right? Because this happened with Sekiro, this happened with Dark Souls 2.
People did think Dark Souls 2 was disappointing because there were a lot of flaws with that game, but people did not think Sekiro was disappointing. In fact, I think Sekiro is the most solid game when it comes to a quality standpoint that FromSoftware has ever released. The fact that he said people found Sekiro disappointing shows that he knows nothing about the Souls games.
This happened with like, the more poorly received FromSlap games in recent years.
The most recent quote-unquote FromSlop game I can think of that got negative attention around it was Dark Souls 2, and that was like 10 years ago.
Is that every single time the audience accuses you of not being good at the game. This happens to me whenever I bring up how Dark Souls is casual, is that like, oh man, you just got filtered by it. No, I've beaten Dark Souls, right?
I mean, dude, there's a stream of you playing Elden Ring, and people are right. You are not good at Souls games.
I just don't like the game, is the real issue here.
And if you left it at that, no one would have a problem with your videos. The games just aren't for you, that's cool. But you sit here and you attack the game and call it shit because you don't like it.
Right, being able to beat it has nothing to do with people not liking games, okay?
It literally does, though, because so many people started playing Elden Ring, they got their ass kicked straight away, and they said the game was shit because they're bad at it. And those are the people that got filtered. They got filtered by the game, and they left negative reviews and trashed the game because they got filtered.
Dark Souls, FromSlop games at their core are not very fun, they're not very memorable, they're not very engaging, they don't have a lot going for them.
I hate when people make videos criticizing games, and their point is it's not fun. Fun is a completely subjective thing. What you might find fun, someone else might find boring. It's not fun has to be one of the most dogshit arguments in the whole gaming community when it comes to criticizing games.
right? They don't have good combat, they don't have good gameplay, they don't have any...
Okay, first of all, cut this shit out of your video. Nobody wants to see this, man. Come on. Like, you could be a successful YouTuber if you cut this shit out. And, second of all, you trash Dark Souls combat for being simplistic, but so is Zelda's, and you're completely fine with Zelda's combat.
There's no reason to play them, really.
There's no reason to play Elden Ring? I mean, I can think of one right now to, have fun.
People only play FromSoft games in order to feel a sense of being... In order to, like, feel like they're in on gamer culture, right?
That's not the entire reason that people play From Software games. People enjoy the challenge, people enjoy the gameplay, people enjoy the story, people enjoy the world building, people enjoy the bosses. Also, you bring absolutely no evidence to the table that people just play these games to feel accomplished or whatever.
It's a status symbol. That's all it is. That's all it ever was. Like, Dark Souls is the game you want to get through in order to pretend as if you're better than other gamers.
There definitely are people out there who act like that. They act like because they can beat Dark Souls with their broken penis, they're, like, better than you or whatever, and that's absolutely pathetic, so, like, I'll agree with them there, but that's not the whole reason people play the games.
Like, that's all this amounts to, right? You know, you can see this on social media right now. Nobody's talking about the DLC or, like, you know, what you do in it or the plot elements. No.
If that's the case, then how come every single video I see in my feed is something talking about the Elden Ring Shadow of the Erdtree DLC, or like one of the bosses, or some of the weapons, or some of the ashes, or some of the like incantations or whatever? And there's infinitely more people talking about Elden Ring than whatever fucking monkey ball you were talking about at the beginning of the video. I didn't even know that existed.
They're trying to pretend that the people who don't like the DLC, right, people like me, people who don't like FromSoft in general, are just casuals who just will never be able to have the skill set to, like, hold the block button and just slowly walk forward.
And yet again, you expose that you know literally nothing about Elden Ring. Blocking hasn't been a viable way to play Dark Souls games since, like, Dark Souls 1. Try blocking against Melania, see how well that does for you. How come every single video I see of someone trying to hate on Elden Ring, they always accidentally expose the fact that they know, like, absolutely fucking nothing about the game they're talking about?
Like, Dark Souls is not hard, you know, Elden Ring is not difficult.
Well, it's harder than most games that come out nowadays. I mean, games come out nowadays with a quote-unquote accessibility option, which isn't an accessibility option, where you just lay down in the grass and you're invincible. Again,
Elden Ring is nothing special, right?
Then how come it was so critically acclaimed and received widespread support from the gaming community?
Right, like that's the major thing I want people to know when, like, they start, like, realizing, like, wow, this DLC is really short, it's really boring, it really doesn't have a lot going for it. The base game was the same way.
The base game was short and boring? Dude, the base game literally took me like 100 hours to beat the game for the first time. Now, that was without guides or anything like that, but there's a lot of content in the base game.
It was something that was hyped up in order to, basically because gamers on other platforms don't have alternative platforms, don't have anything worth talking about or playing, right?
Apparently people on other platforms, and he's talking about platforms that aren't the Switch, have nothing to play, even though 2023, which was last year, was one of the best years in a long time. And I know I'm just gonna get some, like, shit-eating moron in the comment section if I say this, but it's whatever, dude, I don't even care. Like, you wanna come after people on non-Nintendo platforms for not having anything to play, but yet on your Nintendo platform, half the games you get are remakes from another system.
You know, whereas Nintendo fans were getting things like Pokemon Legends Arceus and Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, ARMS, Splatoon 3, right? We get, like, bangers every month, it feels like, right?
I find Nintendo's, like, brand new games are good, but half the time you're just getting an overcharged port from the Wii U.
Meanwhile, like, FromSoft fans are, like, starving, just starving for content. They get excited over everything. Like,
oh, we're the ones who get excited over nothing, but yet you were the one defending Donkey Kong Country Returns getting re-released for more money than it originally launched at.
oh, is that a Berserk reference? Like, oh man, it looks like we're going to do the Eclipse. Oh man, that was so hardcore. They don't have any skill sets outside of like the stereotypical FromSoft formula, right? They don't appreciate other games.
They don't appreciate other games, coming from the person who has said in a previous video that if you don't exclusively play on Nintendo platforms, then you aren't a real gamer. There's just a massive lack of self-awareness when it comes to all of Harman's videos. Do you ever watch these videos back before you post them and realize the shit that you're saying? Your massive lack of self-awareness is one of the main reasons that people find it so easy to debunk your arguments.
They don't appreciate more difficult games, right? It really does feel as if like Dark Souls fans are like genuinely believe that FromSoft titles are like the most difficult titles out there.
Yeah, Dark Souls games are far from the most difficult games out there. The reason why people love FromSoft's difficulty so much is because they're difficult, yes, but they're always fair. Like, it's always your fault when you die. E.T. on Atari is difficult to play, but it's difficult to play because it's shit.
If they ever tried playing the Wonderful 101, like, they would never be able to wrap their minds around, like, actually good, innovative combat.
Yeah, I'm sorry, but I'm above the age of 12, so I don't know what the fuck the Wonderful 101 even is. So I decided to look up what the Wonderful 101 is, and I don't want to shit on this game too hard, because it could be a good game for all I know, but it looks like Reddit slop.
To me, it couldn't be more apparent that the FromSoft formula is on the way out, right? Like, I don't even know why they bother releasing DLC.
I don't even know why they bother releasing DLC. It's almost like Elden Ring is the most successful and popular game that From Software has ever released, and it sold 25 million copies. That couldn't be the reason, could it?
Like, where is FromSoft going to go from here? Like, they can't just bring Tenchu back. Sekiro was never popular.
Sekiro was never popular, according to Harman Smith. He's just completely forgetting the fact that it was critically acclaimed, just like Elden Ring, and won Game of the Year back in 2019. And this isn't like even a big AAA studio we're talking about here.
They can't just keep milking Dark Souls forever, right?
They can't keep milking Dark Souls forever, coming from the guy who would praise Nintendo for milking Zelda for the past 30-something years. And keep in mind, I'm not saying the Zelda games are bad. I thought Tears of the Kingdom was pretty fun, but you can't, you gotta keep that same energy, man. But that is pretty much gonna wrap up Harman Smith's video here, and yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. What's the moral of the story? FromSoft is dead.